The August heat hit me like a wall as I stepped out of my beat-up Honda Civic. The familiar sight of our 2-story colonial house in suburban Phoenix should have felt like relief after 4 grueling years at Arizona State. Instead, something felt off. The lawn was overgrown, paint was peeling from the shutters like old skin, and there was an unfamiliar black pickup truck parked where I usually left my car. A massive, obnoxious monster that looked like it had never seen a day of actual work. I'd been looking forward to this moment for months, planning it during late nights in the library when exhaustion made my eyes water, but determination kept me going. After graduating summa cum laude with a degree in accounting and landing a job at Morrison & Associates, a respected firm downtown, starting in September, I was finally ready to come home and help my family get back on their feet. My parents, Elena and Roberto Martinez, had struggled financially ever since Dad's construction business took a devastating hit during the pandemic. Half his clients had defaulted on payments, 2 major projects had been canceled, and the business, that had once employed 12 people, was down to just Dad working alone, taking whatever jobs he could find. I'd worked 3 jobs throughout college just to avoid taking out student loans, knowing they couldn't help me financially. Weekends at the campus bookstore, weeknight tutoring sessions for struggling freshmen, and summer internships that paid barely above minimum wage, but gave me the experience I needed to land my current position. Every dollar I'd earned had gone toward tuition, books, and basic living expenses, with nothing left over for the kind of college experience my classmates took for granted. No spring break trips, no expensive dinners out, no designer clothes for job interviews. Just work, study, sleep, repeat, Mija! Mom's voice rang out from the front door, but her smile seemed forced, strained around the edges. She was thinner than I remembered, worry lines etched deeper into her face. "You're finally home." I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk, already sweating through my t-shirt in the 110-degree heat. "Hey, Mom, whose truck is that?" "Oh, that's..." She paused, wringing her hands in that nervous way she'd done since I was little. "We have some news, Camila. Good news. Your cousin Diego is staying with us for a while." Diego. I hadn't seen him since we were kids, but I remembered him being spoiled rotten by his parents until they'd had enough and basically disowned him for his constant troublemaking. Last I'd heard through the family grapevine, he was bouncing between different relatives like a toxic pinball, never holding down a job for more than a few months, always having some excuse for why his latest opportunity had fallen through. There was the restaurant job he'd quit because the manager didn't respect his experience, the retail position he'd lost for showing up late repeatedly, and the construction gig he'd walked away from because manual labor was beneath him. "That's nice," I said carefully, following Mom through the front door. The house felt different somehow, cluttered, with unfamiliar belongings scattered around the living room like territorial markings. Gaming equipment that looked expensive, energy drink cans creating sticky rings on my grandmother's wooden coffee table, clothes draped over furniture like this was some kind of fraternity house. The air smelled different too. Stale pizza, unwashed dishes, and something else I couldn't quite identify but definitely didn't like. "Where's he sleeping?" Mom's face went pale, her hands twisting the hem of her faded t-shirt in that nervous way she'd done since I was little. "Well, that's the thing, Mija. He needed somewhere stable to get back on his feet, you know? And since you were away at college finishing your final semester..." My stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. "Mom, no. Please tell me you didn't..." "It's temporary," she said quickly, her voice rising in pitch the way it did when she was trying to convince herself as much as me. "Just until he finds work. You understand, right? Family has to help family. That's what we do. That's what makes us different from other people." I stood there in the entryway, suitcase in hand, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. The house I'd grown up in, the room where I'd studied for the SATs until my eyes burned, where I'd cried over breakups and celebrated acceptance letters, where I'd spent countless nights planning my future and dreaming about coming home successful, enough to help my parents, given away like it meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. Where am I supposed to sleep? My voice came out smaller than I intended. The couch pulls out, Mom said, not meeting my eyes. It's actually quite comfortable, and this is just temporary, I promise. Before I could respond, heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs like a herd of elephants. Diego appeared, looking exactly like the entitled brat I remembered, just 20 pounds heavier, and with a scraggly beard that did nothing to improve his face. He was wearing my old high school basketball shirt, the one I'd left behind because it held too many memories of better times, and it was stretched tight across his expanded gut. His hair was greasy, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had the kind of smug expression that made me want to wipe it off his face with a baseball bat. Camilla, long time no see, cousin. His grin was all teeth, no warmth, like a shark sizing up its next meal. Thanks for letting me crash in your room. Hope you don't mind I redecorated a little. Made it more masculine, you know? Redecorated. The word hit me like a physical blow. My stomach clenched with a mixture of rage and nausea. What do you mean? Oh, got rid of some of that girly stuff. The pink curtains were hurting my eyes, and all those participation trophies were just taking up space. He laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world, slapping his knee for emphasis. But don't worry, I kept the important stuff in a box somewhere, probably in the garage or the closet. I'll find it eventually. The important stuff. My childhood photos, my academic awards, my books, my journals filled with dreams and plans, my certificates of achievement, reduced to stuff and shoved in a box somewhere like unwanted junk. I felt tears burning behind my eyes but refused to let them fall, not in front of him, not when he was clearly enjoying my distress like it was entertainment. Diego, show some respect. Dad's voice came from the kitchen doorway. Roberto Martinez looked older than his 55 years, his once broad shoulders now slightly stooped with worry. Camila just got home. It's fine, Dad, I managed, though my voice was tight. I'm just tired from the drive. Diego shrugged and headed toward the kitchen. No worries, cuz. Make yourself at home. The irony wasn't lost on me, being told to make myself at home in my own house by someone who'd been here all of 5 minutes in the grand scheme of things. Mom bustled around nervously, clearly trying to change the subject. Are you hungry? Mija? I made your favorite, chicken enchiladas. I wasn't hungry. My appetite had vanished the moment I realized my childhood bedroom was now occupied by someone who clearly had no intention of leaving anytime soon. But I nodded anyway, following my parents to the kitchen where Diego was already helping himself to a plate, eating like he hadn't seen food in days. So what's the plan, Diego? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. Job hunting? He looked up from his food, sauce smeared on his chin. Yeah, definitely. Just waiting for the right opportunity, Can't take just any job when you have potential. I'd heard that excuse from him before, usually right before he'd ask for money or a place to crash. What kind of work are you looking for? Management stuff, mostly. I've got natural leadership skills. He gestured vaguely with his fork. These places just don't recognize talent when they see it. I glanced at my parents, hoping to see some sign that they recognized the red flags, but Dad was staring at his plate, and Mom was busy refilling water glasses that didn't need refilling. How long has he been here? I asked Mom quietly while Diego was distracted by his phone. About 2 months, she whispered back. He really is trying, Camilla. He just needs time. 2 months. He'd been living in my room, sleeping in my bed, using my space for 2 months while I was finishing my senior year and graduation preparations. While I was working double shifts at the campus bookstore to make ends meet, he was here, comfortable and unemployed. The rest of dinner passed in awkward small talk. Diego dominated the conversation with stories about his various almost jobs and how unfair the hiring process was these days. My parents nodded along, occasionally shooting me apologetic looks that only made me feel worse. After dinner, I helped Mom with the dishes while Diego disappeared upstairs, to my room, claiming he had important calls to make. "Mija, I know this isn't ideal," Mom said quietly, her hands shaking slightly as she scrubbed a plate. "But he's family. His parents won't take him back, and your Tia Carmen said she couldn't handle him anymore. We're all he has right now." "What about what I have, Mom?" The words came out before I could stop them. "I worked my ass off for 4 years, graduated with honors, got a good job, and I come home to find my room given away and my stuff in boxes." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "It's not forever. Once he gets on his feet." "When, Mom? When is he getting on his feet? Because from what I can see, he's pretty comfortable not working while living rent-free in my childhood bedroom." "Don't raise your voice," Dad said from the doorway, though his tone was more tired than angry. "The neighbors don't need to hear our business." I bit back my response. The neighbors. Always worried about what the neighbors would think, but never worried about how their own daughter felt coming home to find she'd been erased from her own house. That night, I lay on the uncomfortable pull-out couch, listening to Diego's music, thumping through the ceiling above me. My ceiling. My room. I stared at the water stain in the corner that had been there since I was 12, when a pipe had burst during a monsoon. Some things never changed in this house, like the way my parents enabled anyone who asked for help, regardless of how it affected the people who actually deserved their consideration. I thought about my apartment lease that I'd given up, assuming I'd be moving back into my old room for a few months while I saved money from my new job. I thought about my childhood photos and journals, reduced to items in a box shoved somewhere in the garage or closet. I thought about the job offer I'd accepted, partly because it was in Phoenix, and I could help my family while establishing my career. The music upstairs got louder, and I heard Diego talking loudly on the phone, probably to one of his friends, laughing about something. Living his best life in my space, while I tried to get comfortable on a couch that smelled faintly of old cigarettes and dog hair from our ancient retriever who'd passed away my sophomore year. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through apartment listings, but everything decent was either too expensive or too far from my new job downtown. The salary I'd negotiated would be good for a recent graduate, but not good enough to afford the kind of place I wanted while also helping my parents with their obvious financial struggles. Because despite my anger and hurt, I could see the signs. The overgrown lawn, because they couldn't afford regular landscaping. The peeling paint, because home maintenance had become a luxury. Mom's weight loss, because she was probably skipping meals to make the grocery budget stretch. Dad's stooped shoulders carrying the weight of a failing business and a mortgage he was struggling to pay. I'd come home to help them. That had been the plan all along. Graduate, get a good job, move back home for a year or two to help them get back on their feet financially, then find my own place once they were stable. But now I was homeless in my own home. And apparently, my parents thought it was perfectly reasonable to expect me to sleep on the couch indefinitely while Diego enjoyed the comfort and privacy I'd earned through 4 years of sacrifice. The irony was bitter. I'd worked myself to exhaustion, maintaining a 3.9 GPA while working multiple jobs. Also, I could come home and help my family. And my reward was a lumpy couch, and watching someone who'd never worked a day in his life enjoy the fruits of my sacrifice. But I was tired, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. I had to start my job in 2 weeks, and I needed to figure out a living situation that didn't involve sleeping on a couch that had seen better days during the Clinton administration. I closed my eyes and tried to ignore the music upstairs, the uncomfortable springs digging into my back, and the growing certainty that this temporary arrangement was going to be anything but temporary. What I didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The room situation was bad enough, but what my parents were planning to ask of me next would make tonight's humiliation seem like a minor inconvenience. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I had no idea that in just a few days, I'd discover exactly how far my family was willing to go to take advantage of my success, and how much they were willing to sacrifice my future for someone who'd never lifted a finger to earn it. My first week at Morrison & Associates was everything I'd hoped for and more. The downtown Phoenix office buzzed with the kind of energy I'd dreamed about during those long nights studying in the library. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the valley, and my supervisor, Janet Morrison herself, seemed genuinely impressed with my work ethic and attention to detail. After years of theoretical learning, I was finally applying my accounting knowledge to real client cases, helping small businesses organize their finances and prepare for tax season. Janet had taken me under her wing immediately, introducing me to clients as our rising star and giving me increasingly complex assignments. The other junior associates looked at me with a mixture of respect and envy. I was the only one in my hiring class who'd graduated debt-free, and it showed in my confidence and focus. While they worried about student loan payments and whether they could afford their studio apartments, I was building professional relationships and exceeding expectations. But every evening, the professional high came crashing down the moment I pulled into the driveway and saw Diego's truck still parked in my spot. The contrast between my successful, respected workday and my humiliating home situation was becoming more unbearable by the day. Diego had somehow made himself even more comfortable in my absence, spreading his belongings throughout the house like he was marking territory. His clothes were draped over dining room chairs. His gaming setup had expanded into the living room with multiple monitors and speakers that he used at full volume. And he'd started leaving dirty dishes everywhere with the expectation that someone else would clean them up. An expectation that was always met by my increasingly haggard-looking mother. That someone, I quickly realized, was my mother, who seemed to have appointed herself as Diego's personal maid and chef. Every morning, she'd make him breakfast and bring it upstairs on a tray, because he's not a morning person. Every evening, she'd prepare his favorite meals and clean up after him, while he disappeared to important phone calls that sounded suspiciously like video game sessions with friends. "Mija, could you grab Diego's plate from the coffee table?" Mom asked Thursday evening as I walked through the door, still in my professional clothes and heels that had been killing my feet all day. I looked at the plate, still half full of food, sitting next to several empty beer cans and a pile of crumpled napkins. "Why don't you ask Diego to grab his own plate?" Mom's face flushed. "He's on an important phone call upstairs. Something about a job interview." I'd heard this excuse 4 times this week. The mysterious job interviews that never seemed to materialize into anything concrete. What kind of job interview happens at 8 p.m. on a Thursday? "Don't be negative, Camilla," Dad said from his recliner, not looking up from the evening news. "He's trying. Trying." The word had lost all meaning in this house. I grabbed Diego's plate, along with the beer cans, and took them to the kitchen where I found the sink full of more dishes that definitely weren't mine. As I loaded the dishwasher, again, I heard Diego's voice booming through the ceiling. "Nah, man, I'm not taking some minimum wage bullshit. I've got standards, you know. I'm living the good life here anyway. Free room and board. And my cousin's family treats me like a king." My hands stopped moving. Living the good life. Treats him like a king. While I slept on a couch and cleaned up after him like some kind of unpaid housekeeper. I finished the dishes with more force than necessary, the plates clattering against each other as I fought to keep my temper in check. This couldn't continue. I needed to have a serious conversation with my parents about boundaries and expectations. But as I walked into the living room, preparing to address the elephant in the room, Mom intercepted me with that nervous smile that had become all too familiar. "Camilla, can we talk? Your father and I have something important to discuss with you." My stomach dropped. In my experience, important discussions in this family usually meant someone needed money or wanted me to sacrifice something for the greater good. "What's going on?" Dad muted the TV and turned to face me, his expression serious. "Sit down. Mija." I perched on the edge of the couch that had become my makeshift bedroom, still in my work clothes because I had nowhere private to change. "Is everything okay?" My parents exchanged a look that made my anxiety spike. Mom wrung her hands while Dad cleared his throat several times before speaking. The thing is, Camilla, we've been having some financial difficulties, more than we've let on. This wasn't news to me. I'd seen the signs, the canceled cable subscription, the generic brand groceries, the way Mom had started cutting coupons obsessively. How bad is it? We're behind on the mortgage, Dad said quietly. 3 months behind. My heart sank. 3 months. That meant they were in serious trouble, the kind of trouble that could lead to foreclosure if they didn't act fast. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I could have helped. We didn't want to burden you while you were finishing school, Mom interrupted. You had enough stress with graduation and finding a job. But now that you're working, Dad continued, we were wondering if you might consider helping us with a solution we've been exploring. Here it comes, I thought. The ask. The reason for this whole conversation. What kind of solution? We've been talking to the bank about refinancing, Dad said, his voice getting quieter with each word. Getting a new mortgage with better terms, maybe pulling out some equity to catch up on bills and fix some things around the house. That sounds like a good plan, I said carefully, though I sensed there was more coming. The thing is, Mom jumped in, with your father's credit and the business struggles, the bank wants a co-signer, someone with stable income and good credit. Room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioner struggling against the desert heat. I stared at my parents, waiting for them to elaborate, hoping I was misunderstanding what they were suggesting. You want me to co-sign your mortgage, I said finally, my voice flat. It would just be temporary, Dad said quickly, just to get us back on our feet. Once the business picks up again, you want me to co-sign a mortgage on a house where I don't even have a bedroom, I interrupted, my professional composure finally cracking. A house where I'm sleeping on the couch while Diego lives in my room rent-free. That's different, Mom said defensively. Diego is family, and he's going through a hard time. And I'm not family? The words came out louder than I intended. I'm not going through a hard time trying to start my career while sleeping on a couch and cleaning up after someone who won't even look for a real job. Don't raise your voice, Dad warned, but there was less authority in it than usual. No, I think I need to raise my voice because apparently that's the only way anyone listens around here. I stood up, pacing the small living room. Let me make sure I understand this. You gave my room to Diego, who's been here for months without paying rent or contributing anything to the household. You expect me to sleep on the couch indefinitely. And now you want me to co-sign a mortgage, which means I'd be legally responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt on a house where I'm treated like a guest instead of a daughter. You're being dramatic, Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Do you understand what co-signing means? It means if you can't make the payments, the bank comes after me. It means this mortgage shows up on my credit report. It means I won't be able to get my own mortgage for years because I'll already be carrying this debt. Dad's face went pale. We wouldn't let it come to that. You're already 3 months behind, I snapped. How can you promise it won't come to that when you're already in a situation where you need someone else to guarantee your debt? The silence that followed was deafening. Upstairs, Diego's voice continued booming through the floorboards, completely oblivious to the family crisis unfolding below him. Or maybe not oblivious, maybe just indifferent, secure in the knowledge that his needs were being prioritized over everyone else's. We raised you better than this, Mom said quietly, and I recognized the guilt trip for what it was. Family helps family. We sacrificed for you your whole life. And I've been grateful for that every single day, I shot back. I worked 3 jobs in college so I wouldn't burden you with student loans. I chose a career that would let me help you financially. I moved back home specifically to help you get back on your feet. But this isn't help, Mom. This is sacrifice. You're asking me to risk my entire financial future for a house where I don't even have a place to sleep. The couch situation is temporary, Dad started. When? I demanded. When exactly is it temporary until? When is Diego moving out? Give me a date. Another exchange of glances, another long pause. He's looking for work, Mom began. That's not a date. That's an excuse. I grabbed my laptop bag and headed toward the stairs. I need to think about this. Where are you going? Dad called after me. To the garage to call my boss and see if she knows any apartments for rent. Since apparently, I need to find somewhere else to live while I consider co-signing a mortgage on a house I'm not welcome in. I stormed out of the living room, past the kitchen still scattered with Diego's mess, and out to the garage where Dad kept his tools and Mom stored Christmas decorations. It was hot and dusty, but at least it was private. I sat on an overturned bucket and pulled out my phone, not to call Janet, but to do some quick research on mortgage co-signing. What I found made my blood run cold. Co-signers were responsible for the full amount of the loan if the primary borrower defaulted. It would affect my debt-to-income ratio for any future loans. If my parents missed payments, it would destroy my credit score. And if they defaulted entirely, the bank could pursue my assets, including garnishing my wages. I was being asked to risk everything I'd worked for. My credit, my financial future, my ability to ever own my own home, for people who thought it was reasonable to house a deadbeat cousin in comfort while their daughter slept on the couch. The garage door creaked, and Dad appeared in the doorway, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen him. Mija, I know this is a lot to ask. I looked up at him. This man who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with math homework and told me I could be anything I wanted to be if I worked hard enough. It's not just a lot to ask, Dad. It's everything to ask. He sat down on another bucket, his knees creaking as he lowered himself down. The business is in trouble. Real trouble. If we lose the house, then downsize, I said simply. Sell this house, pay off what you owe, and get something smaller you can afford. This is our home, Camilla. Your home, where you grew up. Except it's not my home anymore, is it? You made that clear when you gave my room away. I closed my laptop and looked at him directly. And if it's my home, why am I the only one being asked to sacrifice for it? Dad was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. Diego's been through a lot. Stop. I held up my hand. Just stop. Diego is a grown man who's never had to face consequences for his choices because people like you keep enabling him. And now you want me to enable not just him, but this entire situation. What do you want us to do? Kick him out on the streets? I want you to treat your daughter with the same consideration you show a cousin who contributes nothing to this family. I stood up, dusting off my work skirt. I want you to set boundaries and expectations, instead of just hoping problems solve themselves. And I want you to understand that asking me to co-sign this mortgage isn't asking for help. It's asking me to save you from the consequences of choices I had no part in making. I headed back toward the house, then turned around one more time. I'll think about it, Dad. But you need to think about some things too. Like why you think it's okay to ask me to risk everything while Diego risks nothing. And like what kind of message you're sending about what my loyalty and sacrifice are worth to this family. As I walked back into the house, I heard Diego's laughter, echoing from upstairs, still in my room, still living his best life while the family that was housing him fell apart around him. And I realized that this conversation with my parents was just the beginning. If I was going to make any kind of decision about the mortgage, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. It was time to do some digging into the family finances, and something told me I wasn't going to like what I found. The weekend gave me time to think, but more importantly, it gave me time to investigate. While Diego slept until noon both Saturday and Sunday, in my bed, in my room, I spent the morning hours at a nearby coffee shop with my laptop, using my accounting skills to research my parents' situation. What I discovered made my stomach turn. Using public records and the information I'd gathered from overheard conversations, plus some basic financial detective work that my accounting training had taught me, I pieced together a financial picture that was far worse than my parents had admitted. The house wasn't just 3 months behind on the mortgage. It was underwater. worth less than what they owed due to a second mortgage they'd taken out 2 years ago. According to county records, that second mortgage had been for $45,000, supposedly for home improvements that I couldn't see any evidence of. Dad's business had multiple liens against it from unpaid suppliers, and the Arizona Corporation Commission website showed that his contractor's license was in jeopardy due to unresolved complaints. There were several credit cards maxed out that they'd never mentioned, including a store credit card from Home Depot with a balance that made my stomach turn. $8,000 for someone who supposedly couldn't afford basic home maintenance. But the most shocking discovery came when I cross-referenced the timing of their financial troubles with Diego's arrival, using my knowledge of financial patterns and red flags that I'd learned to spot in my coursework. The second mortgage had been taken out just 6 months before Diego moved in, exactly when his own parents had finally kicked him out, according to family gossip I'd overheard during Christmas phone calls. The credit card debt had exploded around the same time, with large cash advances and purchases that didn't match my parents' usual spending patterns. And there were several large cash withdrawals from their savings account that coincided with what I now realized were previous visits from Diego over the past 2 years. Visits that had supposedly been just for a few days, but had somehow always extended into weeks or months. The pattern was clear to my trained eye. Diego hadn't just gotten into trouble and then sought help from my parents. He'd systematically targeted them as his next source of funding, timing his arrival for maximum vulnerability and gradually increasing his demands until they'd exhausted their resources trying to support him. Armed with this information, I drove home Sunday evening to find the house in chaos. Mom was in the kitchen, frantically cooking what looked like enough food for a small army, while Dad paced the living room, talking loudly on the phone in rapid Spanish. Diego was nowhere to be seen, but his truck was still in the driveway. "What's going on?" I asked Mom as she pulled a second tray of enchiladas from the oven. "Diego's parents are coming for dinner," she said without looking at me. "His mom called this morning. They want to talk about his situation. His situation. Finally, someone else was going to hold Diego accountable for his choices. Are they taking him back?" Mom's face crumpled. "I don't know, mija. They sounded very serious, very angry." Dad hung up the phone and turned to us, his face grim. "They'll be here in an hour. Diego's upstairs getting ready." I watched my parents rush around, preparing for what was clearly going to be a difficult conversation, and I felt a moment of sympathy for them. They'd tried to help family, even if they'd gone about it the wrong way. But that sympathy was quickly replaced by anger, as I remembered the mortgage papers they wanted me to sign, the room I'd been kicked out of, and the financial hole they'd dug themselves into trying to support someone who'd never asked for their help in the first place. "We need to talk after they leave," I told my parents. "About everything." Dad nodded grimly. "I know, mija. I know." An hour later, Diego's parents arrived, and it was immediately clear that this wasn't going to be a pleasant family dinner. Carmen and Miguel Santos looked like they'd aged 10 years since the last time I'd seen them. Carmen's face was set in hard lines, while Miguel's jaw was clenched so tight I was surprised he could speak. Diego came downstairs wearing his best attempt at looking respectable, a button-down shirt that was probably mine from high school and khakis that were wrinkled but clean. He kissed his mother's cheek like nothing was wrong, but she pulled away from him immediately. "Sit down, Diego," Miguel said, his voice cutting through the awkward pleasantries. "We need to talk." The adults gathered around the dining room table while I retreated to the living room, close enough to hear everything that was about to unfold. I had a feeling this conversation was going to be very enlightening. "Do you want to tell us why we got a call from the credit card company looking for you?" Carmen asked, her voice deadly calm. Diego shifted in his chair. "I can explain that." "You opened credit cards in our name," Miguel interrupted. "Maxed them out, left us with $15,000 in debt that we knew nothing about until the collection agencies started calling." My parents went silent. This was news to them too, apparently. "It wasn't like that," Diego said quickly. "I was going to pay it back. I just needed to get on my feet." "For 2 years?" Carmen's voice rose. You've been getting on your feet for 2 years while we've been getting calls from creditors and had our credit destroyed? I didn't mean for it to happen, Diego said, and I could hear the whining tone he'd used as a kid when he got caught breaking something. I was desperate. Desperate enough to steal from your own parents, Miguel said flatly. Desperate enough to forge our signatures. Desperate enough to lie to everyone who's tried to help you. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Carmen crying softly. I felt sick to my stomach, not just because of what Diego had done, but because I was realizing that my parents probably had no idea what they'd actually invited into their home. We're done, Carmen said finally. We're not paying for your mistakes anymore, and we're not enabling this behavior. You're going to get a job, any job, and you're going to start paying us back every penny you stole. Mom, come on. Don't mom me. You lost the right to call me that when you decided to commit fraud. Carmen stood up from the table. Elena, Roberto, I'm sorry you got caught up in this. We should have warned you, but we hoped he might actually change if someone else tried to help him. My dad cleared his throat. What exactly are you saying, Carmen? I'm saying that Diego has done this before. To his brother, to his ex-girlfriend, to us. He finds people who care about him and he bleeds them dry, then moves on to the next person. Carmen looked directly at Diego, who was staring at his hands. And judging by the look on your faces, he's been bleeding you. Dry too. The pieces were falling into place. The second mortgage, the credit card debt, the cash withdrawals, all of it to support Diego's lifestyle while he played the victim and promised to get his life together. Is this true? Dad asked Diego directly. Diego's response was barely above a whisper. I was going to pay them back. That's not what I asked, Dad said, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. Is it true that you've been taking money from us under false pretenses? I needed help. Answer the question. A long silence. Then finally, yes. The word hung in the air like a bomb. My parents had been played, manipulated by someone they'd tried to help out of the goodness of their hearts. Someone who'd been living in my room, eating their food, running up their bills and lying to their faces for months. Get out, Dad said quietly. Roberto, Diego started. Get out of my house. Now. I don't have anywhere to go. You should have thought of that before you decided to steal from us, Dad said, standing up from the table. You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave. Diego looked around the table desperately, but found no allies. Even Mom, who'd been defending him for months, was staring at him with disgust and disappointment. Please, Diego tried one more time. I can change. I can get a job. I can pay you back. You've had months to get a job, I said, finally speaking, up from the doorway. You've had months to contribute something, anything, to this household. Instead, you've been treating it like a hotel while you scammed my parents and destroyed their financial stability. Diego's face turned red. This is none of your business, Camilla. It became my business when they asked me to co-sign a mortgage to fix the problems you created, I shot back. It became my business when I came home from college to find you living in my room while my parents went broke trying to support you. Carmen and Miguel exchanged glances. They asked you to co-sign a mortgage? Carmen asked. 3 days ago, I said, ignoring my parents' panicked looks. They're 3 months behind on payments, and they want me to guarantee a new loan so they can refinance. Jesus Christ, Miguel muttered. Diego, how much money have you taken from them? Diego was silent, his face flushed with shame and anger. How much? Dad demanded. I don't know exactly, Bo. Bullshit. Dad's voice was shaking with rage. How much? Maybe 8,000? Over the past few months. $8,000. No wonder they were behind on the mortgage. No wonder they needed someone to co-sign a new loan. Diego had been systematically draining their resources while pretending to look for work. Get out, Dad repeated. Right now, before I call the police and have you arrested for theft. Diego finally seemed to understand that his welcome had been permanently revoked. He stood up slowly, looking around the room one more time like he was hoping someone would change their mind and rescue him from the consequences of his actions. No one did. As Diego trudged upstairs to pack his things, Carmen turned to my parents, with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Elena. We should have told you what he'd done to us. We should have warned you. We wanted to believe he could change, Mom said quietly. We wanted to help. He preys on that, Miguel said bitterly. He finds good people who want to help, and he takes advantage of their kindness until there's nothing left to take. 20 minutes later, Diego came downstairs with 2 suitcases and a garbage bag full of belongings. He didn't say goodbye, didn't apologize, didn't even make eye contact with anyone. He just walked out the front door and drove away in his truck, leaving behind months of destruction and a family that was now facing financial ruin partly because they'd tried to do the right thing. After Diego's parents left, the 3 of us sat in the living room in stunned silence. The house felt different already, cleaner somehow, like a toxic presence had been removed. I'm sorry, mija, Dad said finally. We should have listened to you. We should have seen what he was doing. $8,000, I said, still processing the number. In how long? 4 months, Mom admitted. He always had reasons. Car repairs, job interview clothes, gas money, food when he was out looking for work. It never seemed like much at the time. Because he was manipulating you, I said gently. A little bit at a time so you wouldn't notice the pattern. Dad put his head in his hands. We're idiots. You're not idiots. You're good people who got taken advantage of by someone who's very good at taking advantage of people. I looked around the living room, seeing it clearly for the first time in days, but we need to talk about what happens now. The mortgage, Mom said quietly. The mortgage, I agreed, and everything else. What followed was the most honest conversation I'd ever had with my parents about money, about expectations, and about what it really meant to be a family. And for the first time since I'd come home, I felt like we might actually be able to figure this out together. But first, I had a room to reclaim. Walking into my childhood bedroom felt surreal. Diego had left it in a state that could generously be called disaster zone. Clothes everywhere, empty food containers on my desk, my childhood dresser covered in his random junk. But underneath the mess, it was still my room. My pale yellow walls, my bookshelf, my window that looked out over the backyard where I used to read on summer afternoons. I spent the next 3 hours cleaning and reclaiming my space, and it was like an archaeological dig through the wreckage of someone else's carelessness. I found my box of important stuff shoved under the bed behind several empty pizza boxes and what appeared to be a collection of energy drink cans that could have supplied a small army. Most of my childhood photos and journals were intact, though several of my academic awards had been damaged. My high school honor roll certificate had been used as a coaster, complete with water rings and pizza grease stains. My bookshelf had been cleared of everything except a few romance novels that Diego had apparently deemed worthy of keeping, and my desk drawers were full of his random junk. Expired coupons, old lottery tickets, receipts from fast food restaurants, and several overdue notices from various creditors that made my blood run cold. He'd been getting collection notices sent to my parents' address, using their home as his mailing address for his financial irresponsibility. As I cleaned, I also found evidence of just how comfortable Diego had made himself. There were multiple sets of keys scattered around, including what looked suspiciously like spare keys to my parents' cars and house. There were printouts of job applications that had clearly never been submitted, dating back months and all for positions he was laughably unqualified for. And there was a notebook filled with what appeared to be schemes for making easy money. Everything, from cryptocurrency scams to multi-level marketing pitches. But the most infuriating discovery was a text message thread on an old phone he'd left behind, apparently thinking it was broken. The messages were between Diego and someone named Marcus, and they painted a picture of calculated manipulation that made me physically ill. "Got the family eating out of my hand," one message read. "The old man feels guilty about his business failing, and the mom is a total bleeding heart. Could probably stay here for years if I play it right." Another message was even worse. "Little cousin graduated college and got some fancy job. Parents keep talking about how successful she is. Maybe I can get her to help out too when she gets back. Work the family guilt angle." He'd been planning this. Planning to manipulate me just like he'd manipulated my parents. Planning to exploit my success and my love for my family to fund his lazy lifestyle. By 10 p.m., I had my room back in order, and my parents were waiting for me in the kitchen with paperwork spread across the table. Bank statements, credit card bills, mortgage documents, and a yellow legal pad covered in Dad's careful handwriting, as he tried to calculate exactly where they stood financially. "It's worse than we thought," Dad said without preamble as I sat down. "With the money Diego took, plus the interest and late fees from missing mortgage payments, we're looking at about $12,000 just to get current." I picked up the mortgage statement and studied it with my professional eye, and that doesn't include the underlying problem of the monthly payment being too high for your income. "Right," Mom said quietly. "Even if we caught up, we'd probably fall behind again within a few months." I set down the papers and looked at my parents, really looked at them. They were scared, exhausted, and ashamed. They'd made mistakes, but they'd made them trying to help someone they thought was family. And now they were facing the potential loss of their home, their stability, everything they'd worked for over the past 25 years. "Tell me about the refinancing option," I said. "What exactly did the bank say?" Dad pulled out a folder of documents from the mortgage company. "They'd give us a new 30-year loan at a lower interest rate, and we could roll the back payments and fees into the new mortgage. The monthly payment would be about $400 less than what we're paying now. But they need a co-signer because of your credit and income situation." "Right. Someone with stable employment and good credit to guarantee the loan." I studied the numbers on the refinancing proposal. The math actually made sense. The lower payment would be manageable on Dad's current income, and the reduced interest rate would save them thousands over the life of the loan. The problem was the co-signer requirement. "What happens if I say no?" I asked bluntly. My parents exchanged a look. "We'll have to sell," Dad admitted. "Probably at a loss, since we owe more than the house is worth right now. We'd have to find an apartment, and with our credit the way it is." He didn't need to finish. I could see the whole picture. They'd end up in a substandard apartment with a security deposit they couldn't afford, struggling to rebuild their credit while Dad tried to keep his construction business afloat. Meanwhile, I'd be starting my career with a clear path forward, eventually buying my own place while my parents lived in whatever housing they could qualify for. And if I say yes, then we keep the house, catch up on payments, and hopefully things stabilize, Mom said. You'd be helping us save our home. But I'd also be taking on legal responsibility for a mortgage I can't afford on my own, I pointed out. If Dad's business doesn't recover, if you get sick, if anything happens to your income, I'd be stuck making payments on a house I don't own. The kitchen fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a neighbor's television through the thin walls. There's another option, I said finally, an idea forming as I looked at the paperwork. What if I didn't just co-sign the mortgage? What if I actually became part owner of the house? My parents looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, what? If instead of just guaranteeing your debt, I actually buy into the house, become a partial owner with legal rights and protections. I pulled out my phone and started calculating. My salary is enough to qualify for a mortgage on my own. What if we structured this as me buying a share of the house, say 40%, and then I'd be responsible for 40% of the mortgage payment? Dad's eyes lit up with understanding. So instead of us owing the full amount and you just guaranteeing it, we'd both be owners and both be responsible for our shares. Exactly. I'd have legal protections as an owner, you'd have a more manageable payment, and we'd all have skin in the game. I was getting excited as the idea developed. I could live here while I save money and establish my career, contributing to the household expenses instead of just crashing on the couch. And if I eventually want to move out, I could either sell my share back to you or we could work out a rental arrangement. Mom was quiet, thinking it through. But that would mean giving up ownership of part of our home. Mom, you're about to lose ownership of all of your home, I said gently. This way, you keep 60% ownership, you get to stay here, and you have help with the financial burden. Plus, I'd have a real stake in maintaining and improving the property, since I'd own part of it. We spent the next 2 hours working through the logistics with the kind of detailed planning that my accounting background had trained me to appreciate. I'd need to have the house appraised by a certified appraiser to determine fair market value for my share, which would probably take a week or two. We'd need a lawyer to draw up the ownership documents properly, making sure all our interests were protected and the arrangement was legally sound. The refinancing would be more complicated with multiple owners, but my research had shown it wasn't impossible. In fact, some lenders preferred it because it reduced their risk. Most importantly, we'd need to establish clear boundaries and expectations for the living arrangement, spelled out in writing so there could be no misunderstandings later. No more random relatives moving into bedrooms without discussion from all owners. No more financial decisions made without consulting everyone who had a stake in the house. No more assuming that family obligation meant unlimited sacrifice without reciprocal respect and consideration. I pulled out my laptop and started drafting a document outlining our agreement, using my professional experience to make sure we covered all the important details. Payment responsibilities, maintenance obligations, decision-making processes, guest policies, and exit strategies if any of us wanted to change the arrangement later. I have conditions, I said, as we wrapped up the initial planning session, reading from my notes. Name them, Dad said immediately, and I could hear in his voice that he understood this was serious business now, not just family sentiment. First, I want complete financial transparency. All bank statements, credit card bills, business expenses, everything. If I'm going to be financially tied to this house, I need to know exactly what's happening with the family finances at all times. I looked up from my laptop. No more secrets, no more protecting me from the truth. I'm an accountant, and I can handle the numbers better than anyone. Fair enough, Mom agreed quickly. Second, any major financial decisions, loans, credit cards, large purchases over $500, get discussed with all owners first. No more surprises. No more finding out about problems after they've already spiraled out of control. Agreed. Third, house rules apply to everyone equally. If someone stays here who doesn't contribute to expenses, they contribute in other ways. Cleaning, maintenance, yard work, whatever needs to be done. No more free rides for anyone, family or not. Dad nodded emphatically. What else? I want the master bedroom. Both my parents looked surprised, as if this request had come out of nowhere. Mija, that's our room. I'm going to be paying 40% of the mortgage on this house. I'm going to be a 40% owner, which means I'm entitled to 40% of the living space. I looked at them steadily, my professional negotiation skills kicking in. You can have my old room. It's plenty big enough for 2 people. And frankly, after what I've been through this past week, sleeping on the couch while Diego lived in comfort, I think I've earned the right to some space and privacy. It was a bold request, but I was done being the accommodating daughter who accepted whatever scraps were left over after everyone else had taken what they wanted. If I was going to take on this financial responsibility, I wanted living arrangements that reflected my investment and contribution. Okay, Dad said after a moment. That's actually fair. We agreed to move forward with getting appraisals and consulting with a real estate attorney. The bank would need to approve the modified arrangement, but the loan officer had already indicated that having me as a co-borrower instead of just a co-signer would actually strengthen the application. As we cleaned up the paperwork, Mom touched my arm gently. Mija, Are you sure about this? It's a big commitment for someone just starting their career. I thought about it for a moment, looking around the kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast before school every day for 18 years, where I'd done homework, at this same table, where I'd had my first serious conversation about college and career goals. I came home to help you, I said finally. This is how I can actually help, in a way that's fair to all of us. Diego was taking advantage of your generosity, but this is different. This is a real partnership with real responsibilities and real benefits for everyone. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time in over a week. It felt strange but good to have my space back, to look around at my books and photos, and remember who I was before this whole ordeal started. I was still the same person who'd graduated summa cum laude, who'd worked 3 jobs to avoid student loans, who'd chosen a career path that would let me help my family. But I was also someone who'd learned to set boundaries, to demand respect, and to structure help in a way that protected everyone involved. The next morning, I woke up early and made coffee for the whole house. A small gesture, but symbolic of the new dynamic we were establishing. When my parents came downstairs, we sat together at the kitchen table like we used to when I was in high school, planning our day and discussing the logistics of our new arrangement. I called the bank, Dad said, sipping his coffee. They want to meet with all of us Thursday afternoon to discuss the modified loan application. I'll take a half day from work, I said. Janet's been really supportive about family stuff. And I found the name of a real estate attorney who specializes in family property arrangements, Mom added. She can meet with us Friday morning. It felt good to be making concrete progress, to be moving from crisis mode to solution mode. But more than that, it felt good to be working together as a team instead of me just being expected to sacrifice for everyone else's benefit. Over the next 2 weeks, everything fell into place with the kind of smooth efficiency that made me grateful for my methodical, professional approach to problem solving. The house appraised for exactly what we'd estimated based on comparable sales in the neighborhood. The bank approved our modified loan application after a thorough review of my employment history and credit score, and the attorney helped us structure the ownership arrangement in a way that protected everyone's interests while maintaining family harmony. Janet had been incredibly supportive throughout the process, even offering to serve as a professional reference when the bank wanted additional verification of my employment stability. I wish more young people had your level of financial maturity, she'd told me during one of our coffee meetings. The way you're handling this situation shows real leadership potential. The closing was scheduled for the following month, and in the meantime, my parents and I began the surprisingly emotional process of switching bedrooms. It was weird at first, helping my parents pack up 20 years of memories from the room they'd shared for most of my life. But as we worked together, sorting through old photos and deciding what furniture would work in their new space, it felt like we were building something new, rather than just rearranging what already existed. Mom admitted that she'd always felt a little overwhelmed by the size of the master bedroom and would actually prefer the cozier feeling of my old room. Dad said he'd always liked the view from my window better anyway. It looked out over the backyard where he'd taught me to ride a bike and where we'd had countless barbecues with extended family over the years. It feels like a fresh start, Mom said as we hung new curtains in what would be their new bedroom. Like we're not just surviving anymore, but actually building something better. More importantly, the new financial arrangement was already making a tangible difference in the household atmosphere. With my contribution to the mortgage payment, my parents had breathing room in their monthly budget for the first time in years. Dad was able to take on a couple of new construction projects he'd had to turn down before because he couldn't afford the upfront material costs. Mom started talking about maybe going back to school to finish her nursing degree, something she'd put on hold when I was born, but had always regretted not completing. The house felt lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from everyone's shoulders. We were no longer just reacting to crisis after crisis, but actually planning for the future. Dad had already started researching business expansion opportunities, and Mom had requested information from the local community college about their nursing program. The night before the closing, I sat in what was about to officially become my bedroom, looking around at the space that would be mine for the foreseeable future. It wasn't the post-graduation scenario I'd originally envisioned, but in many ways, it was better. I had a real stake in my living situation, a clear financial arrangement that benefited everyone, and most importantly, I had my family's respect, in a way I'd never had before. My phone buzzed with a text from my college roommate asking how things were going at home. I thought about how to answer that question. 2 weeks ago, I would have said it was a disaster. Tonight, I could honestly say it was the beginning of something new and better. Complicated, I texted back, but good, really good. And for the first time since I'd come home, that was completely true. I'm writing this from my home office. Yes, my home office in the master bedroom of the house I now partially own, on a Saturday morning in February. Through my window, I can see Dad working in the yard, preparing the garden beds for spring planting. The construction business has recovered enough that he's been able to hire back 2 of his former employees, and Mom started her nursing program last month. The house feels different now, lighter somehow. We have family dinners most nights, but they're voluntary, not obligatory. We share household responsibilities based on availability and ability, not outdated assumptions about gender roles or family hierarchy. When my brother visited over Christmas, he stayed in the guest room, the former couch that had been my bed for that awful week in August. And he pitched in with cooking and cleaning without being asked. We never heard from Diego again, though. Carmen calls my mom occasionally to update us on his latest scams and schemes. He's apparently moved on to a girlfriend's family in Tucson, and they're just beginning to figure out what he really is. We feel bad for them, but we also know there's nothing we can do except be grateful that we learned the truth before the damage was irreversible. The mortgage payments are manageable, the house is slowly being updated and improved, and I've been promoted twice at work. Janet told me that watching me navigate the family crisis with such professionalism and problem-solving skills convinced her I was ready for bigger responsibilities. I'm now handling my own client portfolio and making enough money that I could probably qualify for my own place, but I'm in no hurry to move out. This arrangement works. I have space, privacy, financial security, and a family relationship based on mutual respect instead of one-sided obligation. My parents have their home, manageable expenses, and the dignity of being partners in the solution rather than charity cases being rescued by their daughter. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not getting my own apartment right out of college. If I feel like I missed out on the typical young adult experience of independence and self-discovery, the answer is complicated, but ultimately no. I did discover myself through this experience. I discovered that I'm strong enough to set boundaries, smart enough to structure solutions that work for everyone, and confident enough to demand the respect I deserve. I also discovered that helping family doesn't have to mean sacrificing yourself. Real help, sustainable help, comes from arrangements that benefit everyone involved and respect everyone's contributions and limitations. Diego taught us that by negative example. He took and took and took until there was nothing left to take, leaving destruction in his wake. But the solution we built afterward has made all of us stronger, more secure, and more honest with each other. My old college friends are dealing with roommate drama, expensive rents, and the stress of starting their careers with no safety net. I'm building equity in real estate, living with people who actually care about my well-being, and establishing my career with the stability that comes from not worrying about housing costs consuming my entire paycheck. It's not the path I planned, but it's turned out to be exactly the path I needed. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones that benefit everyone, even when they require us to think creatively about what family, home, and independence really mean. And sometimes, the worst. Crisis can lead to the best possible outcome, if you're willing to stop accepting what doesn't work and start demanding what does.